find yourself feeling really self-conscious in everyday social situations? Are you afraid of being judged by others? Or does the thought of interacting with new people trigger fear or anxiety in you, maybe even leading you to try to avoid such encounters? If these kind of feelings are recognizable to you and they've been part of your life for at least 6 months, and if these feelings have made it hard for you to do everyday tasks like talking to people at work or at school, then you may have what we refer to as social anxiety disorder. Social anxiety disorder is an intense and persisting fear of being watched and judged by others. This fear can have a really big impact on everyday situations that we face at work, at school, or anywhere else where we're facing other people. It can make it difficult to meet new people, make friends, and keep friends long term. So today we're going to have a closer look at what social anxiety disorder is. We're going to look at the symptoms to be aware of and how social anxiety disorder is diagnosed. Now, it's completely normal to feel nervous in some social situations. For example, going on a date or speaking in front of a lot of people may give you that feeling of butterflies in your stomach. So feelings of shyness or discomfort in certain social situations isn't necessarily a sign of social anxiety disorder. It's completely normal that our comfort levels in social situations vary depending on our personality traits and the life experiences that we've previously had. Some people are naturally more reserved while others are more outgoing. But in contrast to that shyness or nervousness that everybody can experience every once in a while, social anxiety disorder causes intense fear, anxiety, and discomfort that interfere with daily routines. It can have a really big impact on everything from our relationships to how we do at work or at school, and pretty much all other social activities that happen in our lives. So while social anxiety disorder is primarily characterized by this intense fear of social situations, there's a number of other symptoms that we often see associated with the disorder. We can divide all these different symptoms into 3 main categories: emotional and cognitive symptoms, behavioral symptoms, and physical symptoms. Let's have a look at the symptoms in each of these 3 categories. Starting out with the emotional and cognitive symptoms, the first one is the one we've already discussed. That is experiencing an intense fear in social situations. The fears that I most often hear my clients with social anxiety disorder describe are fears of being judged, embarrassed, or even humiliated by others in situations where you're either social or you have to perform. The second symptom in this category is excessive worrying. So this is where we see persistent and often irrational worrying about an upcoming social situations, sometimes weeks in advance of it. We also often see a high degree of self-consciousness as a symptom. This can be an extreme self-awareness where we tend to overanalyze everything we say and do, and then worry about how other people are going to perceive that. And finally, for this category, we also often see post-event rumination. So just like we had worrying before, which is thinking about all the things that could go wrong in the future, rumination is overanalyzing all the things that have already happened. So worrying points forward and rumination points backwards. When ruminating on a past event, we often find ourselves focusing on the perceived flaws and mistakes that we think we've made in the social interaction. This can be thinking over something we've said or done over and over again, replaying the conversations and events in our heads. Remember, this is all about our own perception of what's happened. And if we're judging ourselves thinking that we've made a load of mistakes, that can lead us to feel even more self-conscious the next time we're facing a similar situation. So we can kind of end up in this self-perpetuating cycle where the more we ruminate on a past event, the more perceived mistakes we'll find, and the more we'll feel the need to worry even more and be even more self-conscious of the next social event. This also leads us straight into the next category of symptoms, which is the behavioral symptoms. The first classic behavioral symptoms we see for social anxiety disorder is avoidance. So this means that we'll try to avoid social situations where we feel like we could be under scrutiny or we could be judged by others. And it's not hard to see why avoidance could easily become a coping mechanism added on top of the worrying, ruminating, and self-consciousness that we discussed in the emotional symptoms. For some people with social anxiety disorder, it's only certain types of situations that will trigger this intense fear and this desire for avoidance. For example, some people only feel anxious if they need to eat in front of other people or if they need to talk to strangers. But we do also see that people with severe symptoms and severe social anxiety disorder may try to avoid all social settings. Another behavioral symptoms we often see is escape. So when I say escape, it's the need to leave a social situation earlier than what was scheduled. This is typically due to feeling an overwhelming anxiety or distress that means you simply can't stay in the situation. We also sometimes see the need for a safety net. So a safety net can either be relying on other people, like a close friend, or it can be relying on a certain behavior, like looking at your phone, to feel safer during the social event. And finally, for behavioral symptoms, we also see a tendency to have a limited social engagement. So this can be having few friends or avoiding new social situations, which can lead to social isolation. Now, the last category of symptoms associated with social anxiety disorder is physical symptoms. Most of the physical symptoms we see overlap with generalized anxiety disorder as well. The most common ones we see are blushing, so experiencing a reddening of the face or chest due to feeling embarrassed or nervous. Excessive sweating, which is not because of physical exertion or heat. Trembling or shaking, which is often severe enough that other people can see it. This is often in the hands, but it can also affect the entire body. Experiencing a rapid heartbeat, so that's feeling that our heart is beating uncomfortably fast during social interactions or leading up to them. We also see that we can experience stomach problems. This can be in the form of nausea, stomach cramps, or diarrhea. And again, this can both be during the actual social situation or it can be leading up to it. We may also experience difficulty speaking. This may include feeling like you have a shaky voice, a lump in your throat, stumbling over your words, or freezing up during a conversation. We also sometimes see that our breathing gets more shallow or quick. This shallow and rapid breathing can lead us to feeling dizzy or lightheaded. And sometimes this feeling of lightheadedness can also be a symptom. Now, as always, when we're talking about symptoms, it's really important to understand that not everybody is affected in the same way. The symptoms can vary in severity and they may not occur in all social situations. Some people will experience a lot of these symptoms in pretty much every social interaction that they're in, while others only experience them in certain types of situations. It's also not necessary to experience all these symptoms in order to be diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. We're going to look at the diagnostic criteria in a moment, but first I thought I'd give you an example of how clients often describe feeling social anxiety disorder. So I had a client who was able to describe really well what he was experiencing in social situations, and I think a lot of people with social anxiety disorder recognize themselves in this description. My client Simon was describing how he was feeling leading up to and during a big social event. In the situation that he described, he was going to a good friend's wedding where he didn't know a lot of the people that were also going. Now, Simon explained that as soon as he received the invitation for the wedding, he started to feel nervous. He started to think of all the things that could potentially go wrong. As the date of the wedding was getting closer, Simon found himself spending more and more time and energy thinking about all the different situations and conversations and interactions that could happen at this wedding. He was imagining himself in all these different situations, vividly picturing how he'd say something wrong or do something stupid that would lead to other people laughing at him or judging him. So all this time and energy that Simon is spending on imagining all the things that could go wrong are leading to him feeling more and more nervous and more self-conscious leading up to the wedding. When the day finally comes, he feels extremely nervous. He's certain that he's going to mess something up and make a fool of himself. In the days leading up to the wedding, he's starting to feel physical symptoms anytime he thinks about the wedding. He'll start to sweat, he'll start to feel his heart quicken, and he really considers cancelling going to the wedding. But Simon has a partner who convinces him to go along with the wedding and see how it goes. When they arrive at the wedding, Simon tries to focus his attention on his partner, but he's experiencing that his anxiety is getting more and more out of control for him. He's sweating, he's shaking, and he feels like his heart is beating out of his chest. When it comes to having the first conversation with another wedding guest, Simon feels sick to his stomach and he feels his mind going completely blank. His partner steps in and takes the lead in the conversation to take some of the pressure off Simon, but he still finds that anytime he tries to get a word in, he stumbles over his words and his voice doesn't even sound like his own. Simon struggles on like this for a while his anxiety continues to build, until he has to leave the wedding because it's simply got too much and he feels too overwhelmed. Now, as soon as Simon and his partner had left the wedding, even in the car ride on the way home, Simon finds that he starts to replay all the different conversations and situations that had just occurred over and over again in his head. He feels really frustrated and embarrassed with how he just acted at the wedding, and he finds himself beating himself up over it. Simon continues to ruminate and overanalyze all the things that happened at the wedding for days and weeks after, until he finally comes to see me and we start to work with his social anxiety. Now, over the course of therapy, Simon significantly reduced the impact that social anxiety had in his life. He learned different strategies and coping skills that made him feel like he could take back control of his social life. The experiences that Simon had at this wedding were the final drops to make him seek out help. And seeking out help and getting the diagnosis of social anxiety disorder were the first crucial steps that led to Simon feeling better. Now, when it comes to diagnosing social anxiety disorder, we follow the criteria that's set out in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorder 5th edition. Now, that's quite a mouthful, and that's why we just refer to it as DSM-5 in daily use. So practically, the diagnosis is given based on a conversation that you'll have with your doctor or your mental health professional, where we'll ask you a whole bunch of questions about your experiences. We'll ask you about your symptoms, both what specific symptoms you experience, how long you've had them for, and if there's any specific situations that make the symptoms worse. We'll also likely ask you about your family history and if you have any other medical conditions that could explain any of the symptoms. This is all to understand your situation as well as possible in order to be able to determine if social anxiety disorder is likely. So the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety disorder according to the DSM-5 are a fear of one or more social situations that could involve scrutiny from others, having a fear of acting in a way that will lead to a negative evaluation by others or upset or offend others. A specific situation nearly always provokes fear or anxiety, that the person either avoids the situation or attends with intense anxiety or fear, that the fear is out of proportion to the threat, that the fear or anxiety is persistent, usually lasting for 6 months or more, that the fear and anxiety is disrupting daily life, and finally that other symptoms or health conditions can't explain the fear and anxiety the person feels. Now, the real core when diagnosing someone with social anxiety disorder really boils down to two things. One, has the anxiety been persistent over a long period of time? And two, is the anxiety impacting the person's life to an extent where they can't go about their daily activities as they would like to? If you feel like you have social anxiety disorder, so if you recognize the symptoms and descriptions that we've gone through in this video, and you feel like they're having a big impact on your life, then I strongly recommend that you speak to either your doctor or a mental health professional. Understanding your anxiety and potentially getting a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder is the first important step to be able to treat it. Because the good news is that there are treatments that can help you if you struggle with social anxiety disorder. Next week, we're going to have a look at two of the most common psychotherapeutic treatment approaches for social anxiety disorder: cognitive behavioral therapy and metacognitive therapy. We'll have a closer look at how each of them approach treating social anxiety disorder. If you're not already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that. Thank you for watching this one, take care, and bye for now.